It all started innocently enough. My cousin had always been someone I could count on. We shared a lot of memories growing up, silly moments, inside jokes, and those late-night talks where we'd confide in each other about everything. So when she came to me one day, telling me about this problem she was dealing with, I didn't think twice about stepping in to help. She explained that she was going through a rough patch, her finances were tight, and she was struggling to make ends meet. I could see the worry in her eyes, and honestly, it broke my heart. I knew how it felt to be overwhelmed and unsure of what to do next. So, without hesitation, I offered to help. I didn't have much to give, but I had enough to ease the pressure off her shoulders for a little while. I remember her eyes lighting up when I offered my help. She seemed genuinely grateful, and I felt good about my decision. The kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've made someone's life a little easier. I didn't need any acknowledgement or thanks. That's just who I am. I help because it feels right. I started doing what I could for her. I offered financial assistance, helped her with some practical advice on managing her situation, and even gave her some emotional support when she felt down. There were moments when I thought we were really getting closer, that this act of kindness was building a stronger bond between us. But then things began to shift in a way I didn't expect. It started with small things at first. I noticed that she would give me these strange looks when I'd offer suggestions, almost like she was humoring me. But I brushed it off. Maybe I was just overthinking it. After all, who wouldn't be a little overwhelmed when things weren't going well? Still, the more time passed, the more I started to notice something was off. It wasn't long before I caught wind of some behind-the-scenes gossip. She had been speaking about me when I wasn't around, making jokes about how easy it was for me to help her. She even called me a doormat, someone who was too kind for my own good, and she found it funny that I didn't see it. My heart sank when I heard these things. At first, I thought maybe it was just one of those things, an offhand comment that didn't really mean much, but as I started hearing more of these remarks, it became clear. She was mocking me. The very person who had been there for her during her time of need was the subject of her ridicule. It stung. It hurt in a way I couldn't quite explain. I'd never expected that kind of betrayal, especially from someone who I thought was family. What was worse was that it wasn't just one comment or a slip of the tongue, it was a pattern. She'd make little jabs about how I was too naive to see how she was really using me. She'd make fun of my efforts to help as if they were meaningless, and the worst part, she'd do it with a smile with that same warm face she used when asking me for help. It made me question everything, our relationship, her intentions, and even my ability to trust people. Despite the hurt, I didn't want to confront her right away. Something inside me told me that reacting with anger or frustration would only give her what she wanted, attention. I knew that the best thing to do was to let it slide, at least for now, but it was hard. Every time I heard another mocking comment or saw that little smirk on her face, I felt this inner turmoil. I wanted to say something, to call her out on her behavior, but I also knew I had to be smarter than that. So I did the one thing that felt right in the moment. I played dumb. I decided to keep helping her. To keep being the person I've always been, even though I now knew her true feelings. I wasn't going to let her words or actions change who I was, but more importantly, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. I would stay calm, collected, and focused on the one thing I knew I had control over, my own actions. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt like too much, when the mockery stung so badly I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I stuck to my decision. I didn't confront her, I didn't make a scene. Instead, I decided to let karma take care of things. I knew that the truth would eventually reveal itself, and when it did, it would speak louder than any words I could say. As I continued to play my part, acting like everything was fine, a part of me felt empowered. There's something liberating about keeping your cool when others expect you to crack. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to her. I simply had to remain true to myself, and in time, I would let the universe take care of the rest. By this point, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront my cousin or give her the satisfaction of knowing how deeply her words and actions had hurt me. No, I wasn't going to let her see that side of me. Instead, I made a choice to play it cool. I would continue helping her as I had before, maintaining that same friendly, supportive persona, but now with a sense of detachment that kept me from becoming too emotionally invested. And it wasn't that I had any illusions left about our relationship. I knew the truth. I had seen the mockery in her eyes, the way she spoke about me when I wasn't around. But I wasn't going to let that change my behavior. I wasn't going to give her a reason to think she could manipulate me or make a fool of me. In fact, I had a feeling that the more I acted unaffected, the more it would bother her in the long run. It would be like a quiet rebellion against everything she had tried to do. use me, mock me, belittle my kindness, and it felt strangely empowering. So I kept playing the part. I helped her just as I had before. Whenever she came to me for advice or support, I gave it willingly. Whenever she needed a little financial help, I provided what I could. I continued to do everything I had done before, all while maintaining a calm, almost indifferent exterior. The truth was, by now I had detached myself emotionally from the situation. I wasn't doing it for her anymore. I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to let her actions change my values. It was strange, though. Part of me couldn't help but wonder if she noticed the shift. I'm sure she did. People are perceptive, and anyone could tell that something was different about the way I was behaving. I was no longer the person who would react to her mockery or confront her about her hurtful comments. Instead, I was like a stone, solid, unyielding, and silent. It was almost as if I had entered a kind of emotional detachment. I didn't feel the need to explain myself or my actions. I simply continued on, doing what I thought was best. There were moments when the situation tested me, when the temptation to call her out on her behavior was overwhelming. I would hear her gossiping with others, still making jokes at my expense, still thinking it was all a game. And yet, in those moments, I reminded myself of my purpose, to let her see the consequences of her own actions. I didn't need to explain anything to her. I didn't need to make her feel guilty or try to change her. Karma, I believed, would take care of the situation much more effectively than any confrontation or argument ever could. The hardest part was when she would smile at me, pretending like everything was fine, as if nothing had changed. It made me feel like I was trapped in a game where I was the only one who knew the rules. There was something so disingenuous about it, the way she would pretend to appreciate my help while secretly mocking me behind my back, but I resisted the urge to lash out. I knew that if I reacted, it would only give her the chance to manipulate the situation further, so I kept my distance emotionally and mentally while continuing to do what I had always done. I wasn't playing dumb in the sense that I was unaware of her actions, far from it. I was simply choosing not to engage with them. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing that her words had any power over me. In a way, I was silently asserting my control. I refused to let her behavior dictate my response. I wasn't going to let her drag me into her petty games. And in some strange way, I felt proud of myself for maintaining my composure. It wasn't about being passive or weak. It was about choosing a better path. It was about letting her see that I wasn't the type of person who would stoop to her level. I wasn't going to let her mockery or negativity derail me. Instead, I was going to stay true to my values, and I was going to let her actions speak for themselves. By staying silent, I knew I was doing more than any argument or confrontation ever could. And slowly, the realization started to sink in. She wasn't just mocking me, she was exposing her own true nature. Her behavior, her selfishness, her inability to appreciate the help I had offered was becoming more apparent to everyone around her. People started noticing that she wasn't the sweet, caring cousin they had once known. They began to see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't the picture of gratitude I had once believed her to be. Instead, she was someone who took advantage of kindness only to ridicule it when it didn't serve her needs anymore. As I played my part, I began to see a shift in the dynamics of our relationship. The more I remained calm and composed, the more I noticed others around her starting to distance themselves. It was subtle at first, a friend not responding to her texts, a family member giving her less attention, but I could tell it was like a quiet ripple effect, and I knew deep down that it was happening because of her actions. She was alienating the people around her, and she wasn't even aware of it. I hadn't had to lift a finger to make it happen. All I had to do was stay true to myself and let her behavior play out naturally. In a strange way, I was beginning to feel at peace. I had made my choice, and I was standing by it. I wasn't going to let her mockery break me. I wasn't going to let her negativity infect my spirit. I had chosen the high road, and even though it wasn't easy, I knew it was the right path, because sometimes doing nothing is the most powerful thing you can do. And deep down, I knew that one day my cousin would have to face the consequences of her actions, and when that day came, I would be the one who had remained unshaken. As time went on, the dynamic between my cousin and me began to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible shifts, things I couldn't quite put my finger on, but slowly, as the days passed, I could see the ripple effects of her behavior, and it became clear. Karma was beginning to work its magic. It wasn't something I had to orchestrate, nor was it something I actively made happen. In fact, the more I simply stayed out of it, the more everything started to unfold in ways I couldn't have predicted. I had been patient, and as much as I had wanted to confront her, I realized that sometimes the best thing to do is step back and let the universe handle things. People's true nature always catches up with them, and my cousin's was no exception. One of the first signs I noticed was how others around her started to pull away. It was subtle at first, she didn't even seem to notice, but I could sense the shift in the way people interacted with her. I had always been the one to offer help, to be there when she needed it. But now it seemed like others were starting to do the same, only with less enthusiasm and more reluctance. Her so-called friends, the ones who had always been so supportive of her, began to distance themselves one by one. The group chats started to get quieter, the invitations to hang out became fewer, and the once constant stream of compliments and attention she used to receive seemed to dry up. I don't know if she noticed it at first, but eventually I could tell that she was starting to feel it. People who used to rush to her side were now too busy to help, or worse, they were giving her the cold shoulder. It was almost as if she had no idea why it was happening. Her once cheerful demeanor began to fade, and there was an edge of frustration in her voice whenever she spoke about the people she used to be so close with. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. This was the result of her own actions, her mockery, her selfishness, her lack of gratitude, coming back to haunt her. The more I watched her struggle, the more I realized how much she had taken me for granted. She had been so quick to ridicule my kindness and my willingness to help, assuming that I was some sort of fool, but now the tables had turned. The people around her were seeing her for who she truly was, and that was a hard pill for her to swallow. She had built her life on a foundation of manipulation, pretending to be the sweet, innocent cousin, but now that illusion was crumbling. But it didn't stop there. The karma continued to unfold in ways that I hadn't expected. My cousin started to face consequences in areas of her life that she had never even considered. Her finances, which had been tight when I first helped her, didn't get better. In fact, they seemed to worsen. She had never really learned how to manage her money or prioritize her responsibilities, and now that the support she once had was dwindling, she was left to fend for herself. I could see the stress mounting in her eyes. The weight of her poor decisions was starting to bear down on her, and yet she didn't seem to know how to handle it. At times, I almost felt sorry for her. I had seen how hard she had tried to maintain this facade of having everything under control, pretending that she was fine when in reality she was unraveling. But I couldn't allow myself to feel too much pity. After all, this was the same person who had laughed at my kindness, the one who had mocked me when I was just trying to help. She had chosen her path, and now she had to walk it. I began to realize that the more I stayed out of the situation, the more it made her self-destructive behavior stand out. People started to notice the cracks in her character. She began to lose the respect of those around her, and the friendships she had taken for granted started to disappear. I don't think she ever made the connection between her behavior and the fallout. In her eyes, she was still the same person she had always been, the charming, witty cousin who could do no wrong, but to those who had been watching, the truth was clear. And then came the most telling sign of all. One day, she came to me, her shoulders slumped, her face devoid of the usual confidence. I knew something had shifted. She wasn't the same person who had once mocked me for helping her. She was someone who had been humbled, who had faced the consequences of her actions, and was finally starting to see the impact of her own choices. She sat across from me, almost nervously, as if she wasn't sure how to approach the conversation. Her words came out slow, deliberate. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice low. "I've been horrible to you. I didn't realize how much you've done for me, and I've been a complete jerk." It took everything in me not to react immediately. I could have said so much in that moment, told her how much her actions had hurt me, how much I had wanted to confront her, how much I had wanted to make her feel guilty for the way she treated me. But I didn't. I simply sat there, letting her words sink in. She was finally understanding what I had known all along, that kindness isn't something to be mocked or taken for granted. "I didn't mean to treat you like that," she continued, her voice shaky. I thought you'd always be there, that I could just take from you without ever giving anything back. But I see now that I was wrong. You were right, and I'm sorry." For a moment, I was silent. I had to process what she was saying. I wasn't sure if she was truly remorseful or if she was just realizing the consequences of her own actions. But in that moment, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't need to hold a grudge. I didn't need to lash out or seek revenge. Karma had done its work, and she had learned a hard lesson. She had been humbled by her own choices, and that was more powerful than anything I could have said. I forgave her, not because I felt obligated, but because I understood. We all make mistakes, and sometimes it takes facing the consequences to learn from them. The person who had once mocked my help was now the person seeking it, and in that moment, I knew that the cycle had completed itself. I had remained calm, I had stayed true to myself, and in the end, karma had done the rest. After that conversation with my cousin, something inside of me shifted. I hadn't expected her apology to feel as liberating as it did, and yet as the words sank in, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about her apology, though. Honestly, it was more about me. I had stood my ground, had played the part of the fool when I wasn't a fool at all, and had trusted that everything would unfold as it should. And it did. Karma, as I had known all along, had taken care of the rest. I began to realize that this experience had taught me something deeply important, not just about her, but about myself. I had been wronged, yes, but I hadn't let that wrong define me. I hadn't stooped to her level of mockery or resentment. Instead, I had made the conscious decision to rise above it, to let her actions speak for themselves, and to allow the universe to balance the scales. And in the end, I had maintained my dignity and integrity while she had faced the consequences of her own choices. As time went on, I started to notice how much lighter I felt. There was no anger or bitterness weighing me down anymore. I had forgiven her, yes, but more than that, I had forgiven myself for ever allowing myself to be in a situation where I felt disrespected. I had been kind, selfless, and helpful, and I had nothing to regret. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Now it was her turn to learn from those choices, and in some way, that was a relief for me. I didn't have to carry the burden of resentment or hatred. It was a freeing feeling. But what struck me most was how much her apology had changed the way I viewed relationships, particularly those where there is an imbalance of power. Before, I had always believed that being kind and helpful would create bonds, strong, lasting relationships based on mutual respect. But this experience had shown me that sometimes people will take advantage of your kindness, and that's not something you can always control. What you can control, however, is how you choose to respond. I didn't have to be bitter. I didn't have to lash out or confront her in a dramatic way. I could choose to play the long game, to let time and circumstance reveal the truth, and in the process, I had learned the power of detachment. Detachment wasn't about being cold or distant. It was about choosing not to let other people's actions dictate my happiness or peace of mind. It was about recognizing that I couldn't control what others did, but I could control how I reacted. What made her apology even more significant was the fact that I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't demanded it, nor had I even expected it. It was offered freely, and that's what made it genuine. She had come to a point where she had realized her mistakes, and I hadn't pressured her into it. I hadn't tried to make her feel guilty or manipulate her into feeling remorse. I had simply stayed true to myself, and in doing so, I had created the space for her to recognize her own shortcomings. And as she apologized, I could see the change in her eyes, the vulnerability, the self-awareness that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just an apology for the sake of mending things, it was an apology that reflected growth. It was a recognition of her own behavior and an understanding of the impact it had on those around her. For the first time, I saw her not as the cousin who mocked me, but as a person who was capable of acknowledging her mistakes and striving to do better. But the most profound thing I learned from this whole experience wasn't just about my cousin. It was about the power of patience, the strength in not reacting in the heat of the moment. I had given her the space to figure things out on her own, and I had trusted that, in time, she would come to see the truth. I hadn't tried to change her. I hadn't tried to force her to see things my way. I had simply allowed the situation to unfold, and in doing so, I had learned that sometimes the best way to handle conflict is not by directly confronting it, but by letting life take its course. People grow, they change, and they learn when they are ready. In a way, I felt proud of myself, not for being right, but for being wise enough to step back and let the process unfold. I hadn't needed to fight her. I hadn't needed to shout or make my voice heard in a way that would have been destructive. I had allowed her to learn from her own actions, and in doing so, I had allowed myself to maintain my peace. And that, I realized, was the real victory. The aftermath of all this also brought a sense of clarity in other aspects of my life. I began to see the relationships around me with a different lens. I became more selective about where I invested my time and energy. I realized that I didn't need to give everything to everyone, that it was okay to set boundaries, and that my kindness didn't have to come at the cost of my self-respect. I had given so much of myself to my cousin, but I understood now that I couldn't allow others to take advantage of my generosity without giving something back in return. My energy was valuable, and it was important that I protect it. By the time everything had settled, my cousin and I had found a new understanding of one another. We weren't the same as before, and that was okay. I wasn't interested in rekindling the old dynamic where I was her doormat. But I also wasn't interested in holding grudges or staying angry. I had found a sense of closure, a sense of peace that allowed me to move forward. I wasn't going to forget what had happened, but I had forgiven it. I had learned the value of detachment, of letting go, and of letting karma do the heavy lifting. As I looked back on everything, I realized that the experience had been a lesson in resilience and self-respect. I had faced disrespect and mockery head-on, not by confronting it directly, but by staying true to who I was. I hadn't let her behavior diminish my spirit. I had risen above it, and in the end, I had come out stronger, wiser, and more aware of my own worth. I no longer needed to prove anything to her or anyone else. I had learned that sometimes the greatest victory is not in changing others, but in changing the way you see the world and respond to it.